Coronavirus crisis. We examine the responses to the fast-spreading Omicron variant. Election integrity. As the political battle intensifies on Capitol Hill, we take a closer look at the measures and what they mean. Pro-life agenda. 2 U.S. states pursue new initiatives to protect the unborn. And the sound of music. The Holy Father surprises a store in Rome. We'll explain. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden acknowledges higher prices are squeezing family budgets, and he admits there is more work to do. This as Republicans blast the latest numbers showing consumer prices jumped 7% in December compared to just 1 year earlier. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, it's the worst inflation since the early 1980s, some 4 decades ago. Prices for things like cars, gas, food, and furniture all up. And if you're earning a bigger paycheck, chances are it's being gobbled up by inflation. As for President Biden, he's being pummeled on multiple fronts.
With inflation soaring, President Joe Biden releases a statement on the Consumer Price Index acknowledging this report underscores that we still have more work to do, with price increases still too high and squeezing family budgets. On Twitter, Republican Senator John Thune from South Dakota writing, "Who could have predicted that dumping trillions of federal dollars into the economy would skyrocket inflation? Americans continue to pay the price for Democrats' reckless spending." And House Republicans tweeting, "Inflation is taxation." Meanwhile, Omicron.
We're not going to eradicate this. We've only done that with smallpox. We're not going to eliminate that. That only happens with massive vaccination programs like we did with measles and with vaccines. But we ultimately will control it.
And now, more virus testing for schools. The Biden administration promises more aid to keep schools open, including sending 5 million no-cost point-of-care tests per month to schools and providing 5 million additional lab-based PCR tests for free to schools per month. But those 10 million tests soon going out only cover a small fraction of the need. As for those masks,
what I will say is the best mask that you wear is the one that you will wear, and the one you can keep on all day long, that you can tolerate in public indoor settings and tolerate where you need to wear it.
Now back to inflation for a moment. Listen to some of these numbers right here. Bacon price is up nearly 19% from a year ago. Men's coats and suits up nearly 11%. Furniture for your living room or dining room up more than 17%. And renting a car, you'll pay 36% more compared to the same time just 1 year ago. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has been very clear that passing voting rights legislation is a priority for Democrats. And President Joe Biden reinforced that yesterday with a speech in Georgia. He gave full support for the legislation and reprimanded state lawmakers, saying Republican-supported election integrity laws were Jim Crow 2.0. And join me now to discuss this is Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Hans, welcome back. Always great to see you. Well, the president's speech didn't sit too well with many people. In fact, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called out the president today for stoking division. I want to get your thoughts on that. And what did you think of the speech?
Well, the speech was entirely based on a false premise, the idea that election reform efforts are suppressing votes. We know that's not true. Voter ID laws, for example, which Joe Biden and others claim is Jim Crow 2.0, that's not Jim Crow. In fact, a vast majority of black voters support ID, as do all voters. They think it's a common sense requirement. So the idea that votes are being suppressed, it's just not true. The census report on the 2020 election showed we had the highest turnout in a presidential election in this century. So that's just more evidence that that Biden and Kamala Harris are making false claims.
Hans, for those that are maybe still confused about all these bills, can you break those down for us and what these bills hope to achieve, and how likely is it, do you think, they'll pass?
There are two big election bills and then a third one. The two ones that folks have been talking about is S1, the For the People Act, and another bill that was put forward by Senator Klobuchar called the Freedom to Vote Act. Those two bills would basically federalize and micromanage the administration of elections, something that's always been done by the states. They would gut all state voter ID laws. They would restrict the ability of states to check the accuracy of their voter registration rolls. I mean, it's just a whole series of really bad changes that would get rid of the safety protocol states have put in. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that's the third bill that Joe Biden praised it yesterday. That also is a bad bill because what it would do is give unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats at the Justice Department the ability to essentially veto almost all state law changes affecting elections made by state legislatures or by voters in referenda. It's a very anti-democratic bill.
And Hans, do you think that these will actually get passed?
If Joe Manchin and others, such as Kristen Sinema, continue to say they're going to support the filibuster rule, no, they won't pass. By the way, one of the ironies of the speech that Biden gave is that he's saying we need all these changes to the Voting Rights Act, like the John Lewis bill. That law was passed in order to protect the rights of minorities, the voting rights of minorities in this country, and yet they want to get rid of the filibuster rule, which does the same thing in the U.S. Senate and basically make the Senate subject to what I would have to call mob rule.
Yeah, I want to turn now to the midterm elections. As we know, the 2020 election was really plagued with pandemic-related difficulties. Do you think we will see those same challenges in the midterms in 2022?
I don't think so. People are getting out again. There's no reason, given the kind of safety protocols that states have put in place, grocery stores and other businesses have put in place, there's no reason for people to not be able to vote in person in their polling places. There's no reason to extend the rules that were put in place to handle COVID, and I'm hoping that that's, in fact, what state election officials do across the country.
And Hans, before I let you go, any final thoughts, and what else are you following?
Well, like I said, Biden and Kamala Harris and others, Chuck Schumer too, they are exaggerating and making outrageous claims of what's happening in state election reform efforts, which are good efforts to try to protect voters in order to support pushing these election bills in Congress and in the Senate that would frankly guarantee dishonest and unfair elections in the future. That is a real problem, and it's one that people should not get in line with.
Well, Hans, thank you so much for coming on. Always appreciate your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Well, now that the House and Senate are back, work intensifies on economic issues and voting rights reform. But how does each party see the current state of the nation, from inflation concerns to voting rights? Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales tells us what he found.
Here's a question. What's your opinion of the current U.S. economy? Republicans and Democrats have very different views, and House members wasted very little time coming back from break back to D.C. to let their views be known.
I think President Biden has an incredible record to be proud of. 6.4 million jobs created in the last year. That's more than any first year of a president in American history.
The percentage of Americans working in the workforce is the lowest it's been since the Carter administration.
The rhetoric wasn't much different in the Senate, where lawmakers are dealing with voting rights reform and possible changes to debate rules.
We know what they're doing. They're making it harder to vote, particularly for people of color, for young people, for disabled people, for people who live in urban areas.
Don't believe this idea that all of these states have changed their laws to make it harder to vote. All of these states have changed their laws in a way that makes it easier to vote.
The lack of bipartisanship shows up in surveys. A recent Pew Research Center survey shows large majorities of Americans, some 85%, feel the tone and nature of the political debate on Capitol Hill has become more negative in recent years, as well as less respectful and less fact-based. And the rhetoric can get personal. Representative Jeffries says Democrats won't be lectured by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who wants to ban members from stock trading.
With respect to Kevin McCarthy, does anyone take this guy seriously on any issue, particularly as it relates to ethics?
One thing that does bring lawmakers together when one of their own passes. Leaders from both parties took time to honor former Senate Democratic leader Harry Reid, whose body is lying in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Also making news, President Biden plans to make another trip to the Capitol tomorrow to talk with Democrats on how to advance the voting reform measures. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
South Dakota's Governor Kristi Noem is supporting a ban on abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. She also favors legally allowing prayer time in schools. These were among several conservative goals from her State of the State address yesterday. 2 Republicans in Florida's legislature have filed bills that would ban most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Governor Ron DeSantis has expressed his support. The measures are modeled after Mississippi's heartbeat law, which awaits a ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court. An Albanian nun whose life story inspired Pope Francis has died at the age of 92. Sister Marie Kalida has shared her story with Pope Francis during his papal visit back in 2014. Local priests had helped her to secretly baptize infants and bring Holy Communion to the sick and the dying during Albania's oppressive communist regime. Her call to religious life waited almost 50 years before taking vows as a stigmatine sister in 1991. In Somalia, at least 10 people were killed and 9 others were wounded from a suicide bombing at the international airport in Mogadishu. The attack targeted a UN convoy at a checkpoint leading to the heavily fortified airport. An al-Qaeda-linked extremist group, which controls parts of Somalia, has claimed responsibility. In Brussels, there were international talks today over Russia's military buildup near Ukraine. It was the first NATO-Russia Council meeting in over 2 years. The U.S. and NATO rejected proposed Russian security demands in exchange for an easing of tensions over Ukraine, but both sides are remaining open to future talks on arms control, missile deployments, and prevention of military incidents. Coming up, why Pope Francis says hard work can lead to big rewards. Pope Francis sends his condolences on the death of the president of the European Parliament. The Holy Father met David Sassoli last June. The 65-year-old lawmaker died earlier this week. His funeral is on Friday at the Basilica of St. Mary of the Angels and Martyrs in Rome. Pope Francis reminds the faithful that working hard at our place of employment is more than an essential part of daily life. It is also a path to sanctification.
In questi tempi di pandemia, tante persone hanno perso il lavoro.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father notes that we can use the workplace to express ourselves and our love of the Lord. Pope Francis also prayed for those who work in dangerous jobs, and he asked for strength and hope for those who are out of work because of the coronavirus crisis. 2 organizations within the Vatican recently issued a document saying that there is a moral responsibility to receive the coronavirus vaccine. The 20-point statement was released late last year. It comes from the Vatican COVID-19 Commission and the Pontifical Academy for Life. They say the vaccines were developed as a public good and should be taken for the health of individuals and the community. Pope Francis has also weighed in on the vaccine, among other topics. Joining us now from Rome is EWTN News Rome correspondent Colm Flynn. Colm, great to see you. Tell us, what has the Pope been saying recently at the Vatican?
Good evening, Tracy. Yes, Pope Francis has been making headlines with some of the things that he's been saying in his speeches recently, and he doesn't seem to be mincing his words. For example, let's start with the Pope's meeting on Monday with the Diplomatic Corps. That's the Pope's annual meeting with all the ambassadors who represent nations around the world. And in a speech here at the Vatican, the Pope spoke out against the so-called cancel culture in today's society. He said it was invading many circles and public institutions, and he said that people should not be cancelled under the guise of defending diversity. He also warned against silencing voices in society that are not politically correct or go against the modern narrative. He said that this leads to a one-track way of thinking and said that we should cherish and understand our differences and not cancel them. And Tracy, he also spoke about the vaccines on Monday, something which of course has divided many people, both in relation to concerns over their long-term effects and also the mass mandating of vaccines. The Pope's opinion, he said it was one's, quote, moral obligation to receive the vaccine, and he denounced people who he said were swayed by baseless information. Now, these comments were met with mixed reactions from Catholics and others, and it's interesting to note that Pope Francis has been one of the most vocal world leaders advocating in favor of vaccinations. And recently, too, the Pontifical Academy for Life, a department within the Vatican, they were lobbying for child vaccination, which has been a very controversial topic. They stated that they recommend children over the age of 5 should be vaccinated to, quote, protect children from any, even if less frequent, serious consequences of COVID-19.
Oh, Colm, there was something else that the Pope said that caused quite a stir as well. It was about people and pets. What more can you talk to us about that?
That's right. It was last week the Pope made headlines around the world again when he suggested that people who have pets over children are selfish. He was talking about parenthood during his general audience, his weekly general audience, when he noted that people were choosing to have less children, sometimes just one or none, but they will have cats and dogs. Now, he prefaced what he was going to say by saying that some people may laugh at the statement he was about to make, but in his opinion, it was a form of selfishness. He said, quote, "It is a denial of fatherhood and motherhood that diminishes us all. It takes away our humanity." He went on to say that people who were unable to have children should consider adoption, telling them not to be afraid of parenthood. And then he also went on to reference the demographic winter, speaking about countries with declining birth rates in certain parts of the world.
Okay, thank you again, Colm.
Thank you, Tracy.
Up next, how some Catholic schools are confronting the coronavirus and keeping kids in school. Plus, Pope Francis goes on the record. We'll explain. Well, the now infamous letter from the National School Boards Association comparing concerned parents to domestic terrorists was apparently solicited by Education Secretary Miguel Cardona through a Freedom of Information Act request. Emails between members of the NSBA have surfaced, which say Secretary Cardona asked for the letter. A spokesperson for the Department of Education has denied this allegation. And joining me now to discuss this is Thomas Carroll, Superintendent of Schools for the Archdiocese of Boston. Thomas, welcome back. Always so good to see you. First off, I want to get your thoughts on this new revelation. What do you think this signals, especially to parents?
Yeah, first of all, I don't get in the middle of politics, but what I would say is the Catholic Church's position, the view of our Catholic schools, is parents are the first educators of their children. They deserve to have a voice. I take calls of all hours a day, 7 days a week from parents of one concern or another, and have been confronted at meetings from time to time. But I take that as a sign, a good sign of the passion that parents have about their children. There's nothing wrong with it. We welcome it. And I think that's the way it should be perceived by anybody who's in the education business or anybody who's in politics, which is that children belong to the parents and parents have a right to express their view, and that view should be respected.
Yeah, as we know, it's really certainly been a challenging time, for parents, for children, and also educators. And now we have this new Omicron variant, which we know is highly infectious and causing some public schools to go back to remote learning. How are you able to balance safety with your students' educational needs while keeping them in the classroom?
Yeah, our mantra is stay open and stay healthy. We want to stay open at all costs, any way we possibly can. Last school year, when the districts were closed, we were open all year long, and we're doing the same this year. It is becoming challenging. Omicron is, even though it's a less virulent virus than what came before it, every time somebody gets it, they're out for 5 days at a minimum. And so it's becoming, from time to time, we have a lot of teachers out or a lot of students out because of the virus. We've been able to contain the spread within our schools. So all the cases we're getting are from outside. We have virtually no spread within our buildings. And we're trying to keep the numbers down, because if everybody follows the rules, which we did last year, we'll be able to keep the schools open. Here or there, somebody might have to close for a day or two. But this whole idea of an entire city closing down schools in our entire school district, I think does an incredible disservice to children. There's no doubt that children are better off being in school than not. And so the kind of remote education that's occurred in a lot of districts has led to a tremendous learning loss in district schools in many, many cases, particularly in urban areas. We avoided that in Catholic schools because we stayed open. Our teachers want to be in school. They're not haggling to get out of school. Our kids want to be in school, and their parents want the children in school. And so everybody's working together to keep school open.
That's wonderful. The Biden administration announced that it's going to send out millions more of rapid COVID and PCR tests to schools. What do you think of that strategy? I mean, do you think that will help to prevent going back to remote learning?
So I think it's important if people have any symptoms to get tested, because the last thing we want is somebody who has any form of COVID being in a classroom spreading it to other kids. The very practical thing from somebody running, we have 101 schools in the Archdiocese of Boston, is we have to have enough teachers who aren't sick in order to run all the classes that the children are in. So that's why we are urging parents to get tested whenever either they or their children are potentially sick, because we have to make sure that we can keep the classrooms operational. So if you want us to stay open, you got to help us keep your kids healthy. So that's what we keep advising the parents. And the parents understand that. They're from time to time, they have to do things that they don't like, that we don't like, that nobody likes. But the reality is the highest priority here for all of us is keeping the schools open so the kids can learn and they can be with so they can be with each other and with their teachers. That's the highest priority for us.
Yeah, indeed. We have probably less than about a minute or so left, but I do want to ask you this. Because of the pandemic and various other issues, a number of public school districts saw their enrollment decline, and parents opted to put their children in Catholic schools or private schools, or even homeschooling gain traction as well. Do you think that we'll see that trend continue? And also, what are you seeing at the Archdiocese of Boston as far as enrollment numbers?
Sure. We took a big hit when the pandemic first hit, because a lot of people found themselves unemployed. They couldn't afford to pay tuition, even though our tuition is very affordable. And so we took a hit initially. But since July of 2020, when the teachers unions of Massachusetts announced that they were going remote that year, we've been on a tear. We gained 4,400 students that year. And this year, when a lot of people thought those parents would go back to public schools, we got even more. So we added another 1,300. This is in a context which for 60 years all across the country, Catholic enrollment has dropped from more than 5 million students down to 1.6 million students. So the trend here has been pretty negative for a long time. But since last summer, it's been going really well in terms of enrollment. We're happy to have these new students. They're happy to be there. And we look forward to keeping schools open so that we can educate them and they can be with their friends and with their teachers as well.
Well, Thomas, unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. But thank you so much for speaking with us today, and we wish you continued success. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
And finally tonight, a music shop in Rome welcomes back a longtime customer who, for good reasons, had not been in the store for a while. Well, it was Pope Francis. And the Holy Father frequently shopped at Stereo Sound during his years as a cardinal. Well, last night, he made good on a recent promise to stop by and bless the newly renovated store. During the brief visit, the owners gave Pope Francis a classical music CD as a gift. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.